Hello again. Welcome to episode 2 of the Snackable hpcnotes video series. I am recording this episode at the start of SC20, which is, as you know, the biggest annual conference for the supercomputing community, although I probably won't publish the video until Tuesday or Wednesday. SC is, of course, wholly virtual this year due to the COVID pandemic. I think the SC organisers have done a great job of delivering an online conference. From what I can see so far. However, you do hear a lot of people on Twitter and in private conversations emphasising how much they miss attending SC in person. The event as a whole and the phenomenon that is SC, and the value that comes from meeting and networking with other people in person. It's actually interesting to observe, I think, that there are two very different perspectives on SC and what SC actually is. The first is that SC is predominantly an academic conference or a technical event, with the main focus being the technical paper program and the keynotes and the plenary sessions, with the exhibition playing a supporting role, albeit a very large supporting role. The other perspective is that SC is primarily a convention of people, most of whom don't attend, or at least don't prioritize, the technical paper sessions, instead focusing on the exhibition, specific workshops, the many side meetings and private events going on in parallel in the nearby hotels, or the networking receptions, and so on. It certainly appears from the outside, I would argue, that the conference planning committee starts with the first perspective, although you could argue that the majority of attendees' experience is actually closer to the second perspective. Either way, from a personal perspective, I often say that by Monday afternoon of SC, I have already thoroughly justified the trip to whichever city is hosting SC. The highest value of SC for me, and it seems for many others, is the meeting the people, the networking, the meeting old friends, meeting new people, learning and sharing information and stories, often behind the scenes or under some degree of confidentiality, and actually helping other people to make new connections as well, whether those people are new to the community, or indeed existing people in the community. So by the time I've had the conversations with various HPC people in the airports on Saturday morning, and the flight, and on the plane, on the flight to the US, the private dinners on Saturday and Sunday, and lunches and so on, the various vendor events over the weekend, and then of course in past years, my tutorials that I've delivered on the Sunday or the Monday, I've gained huge value already by the time we get to the end of Monday. In fact, I often joke I'm ready to go home by Monday. Of course, you then stay for the rest of the week, and you gain even more value with the technical sessions, the networking receptions, and the exhibition itself, and again, just the opportunity to meet and interact with people. It is worth noting that attending SC is a privilege. Many people, or most people in the HPC world, never get to attend, or very rarely get to attend SC. So having SC as a virtual event this year, I think, will widen the access to the technical content, will widen the overall audience for SC, I think, especially for those who would not normally attend SC. But of course, that doesn't replace the people side of the conference. And even for the thousands who do attend SC, I would argue that not everybody has the same access to the networking opportunities that exist. Not everybody is aware of them, and not everybody is invited to everything. The official orientation activities at SC, I think, are mostly built around the technical program and don't really introduce and cover that full richness of SC. What SC has to offer beyond the technical papers and the workshops and tutorials and so on. So I think it is worth each of us thinking how we can help others to benefit from that richness of the event as a whole, especially new entrants to our community, but not just new entrants. But a lot of people have been involved in HPC for a long time who've never had that privileged access. So how can we help others build their networks and gain the benefits that many of us enjoy at SC, especially as a community, we frankly are struggling to seriously address the inclusivity and diversity challenge that our community faces. How can we help people who've not had that advantage starting out, or have not had the privileged access, or carrying a disadvantage in some way? How can we help those people to build the networks, to gain the benefits of the people side of HPC, to help them in their careers, and of course, therefore, to help the community as a whole? So there's a challenge for all of us, and I don't think, or I certainly don't have any answers straight off. Changing topics, one of the big stories at the start of each SC is the newly published Top 500 list. So this year's list, which will be published on Monday night. On first look, the November 2020 list appears to be a case of not much news. There will be the fewest ever new entries to the list. There will be only 4 new systems in the top 20. But even with that, there are always interesting debating and discussion points around the list. For instance, if we take that trend or that observation of the fewest new entries, I think it is a trend. I haven't done a full analysis, but if you smooth out the bumps a little bit and take the average of new entries over the last decade or so, I think there's definitely been a downward trend in the number of new entries to the list. We've kind of had this theme a number of SCs now and ISCs where we've been talking about the small numbers of new entrants to the system, to the list. Sorry. So I think that there's definitely a COVID effect this year. Logically there has to be, both in terms of organisations being in an economic situation where they can't invest in new systems, but also for those who have procured before COVID started, there will be delays in able to actually deploy and implement and install and stand up the systems. But I think the effect has been going on longer than that, so it's not all attributable to COVID. You could argue there's some effect in there of people increasingly turning to cloud, so instead of buying a system and deploying it, they're using cloud for that. But I think that is probably only an effect of the last couple of years at most. It certainly hasn't been going on for a decade, for any significant amount anyways. I actually personally think the biggest impact on this, or the biggest contributor to this slowdown in new systems of the list, is still the lingering effects of the 2008 financial crisis. The big global financial crash that happened in 2008 massively slowed down investment programs, and not just the investments themselves, but the planning for the investments in both the private sector and the public sector. And so that took a long time, multiple years, for even the planning processes to restart. And then, of course, that then takes a couple of years thereafter before the investments start to come through. And I think that is only really just starting to get back on its feet, as it were, before being slammed again by COVID this year. One of the other observations this year, one of the biggest increases in capacity or new systems or new capabilities on the list this year is actually the 30 petaflops or so of Limpac improvement on the Fugaku machine through the additional capacity they added. In fact, the only new addition to the list that was bigger than that 30 petaflops was the Joules booster system in Germany. Something similar happened in 2018 when the Summit supercomputer Oak Ridge was first listed. It was the single biggest increase in the list in November of that year was the increase in Limpac score that Oak Ridge achieved since their June submission. So there's an occurrence now a couple of times whereby the biggest system is so much bigger than the rest that even a change in the performance of that big system becomes the biggest new entry in itself on the list. There's many more observations you can make about this fascinating institution that is the Top 500. but this video is already getting long, so I'm going to cut it there. I'll come back to some observations maybe in a future episode, or in a blog post, or I'm certain I will be talking about my observations over Twitter over the next couple of days. After some lobbying from friends on Twitter, I am going to switch the triggers for the juicy reveals and the behind-the-scenes anecdotes about the world of HPC or other things to be powers of 2. So the next reveal will be 128 subscribers, not 100. And with that, that is all for episode 2. Keep an eye out for the next episode, and please do feel free to make suggestions for future topics. Thanks all for tuning in.